For thousands of years, the civilizations of man have grappled with the prospect of immortality, each in its own way. None has left its mark more spectacularly than one of the very first, ancient Egypt. Starting 5,000 years ago, the Egyptian people turned their singular genius to the pursuit of life after death, leaving a legacy of riddles that remain unanswered. But in the desert, tantalizing clues are bringing us face to face with the mysterious pyramid builders for the first time. And in distant laboratories, scientists are going to extraordinary lengths to understand the Egyptian way of death. As never before, modern science is breathing new life into the secrets of the Pharaohs. "45 centuries ago, one of the most extraordinary feats of human history rose out of the Egyptian desert. The 3 royal tombs of the Pharaohs, with more than 6 million limestone blocks, took just 70 years to build. Without modern technology, workers lifted blocks weighing an average of 2.5 tons each and put them in place at a rate of 1 about every 2 minutes. The apparent impossibility of the task has led some to speculate that the Egyptians possessed some mystical knowledge long since lost, or even had help from aliens. But now the sands of the Giza Plateau are yielding startling new clues to the ancient puzzle of who built the pyramids and how.
200 years of digging have produced pyramids, tombs, temples, statues, nice inscriptions, and relief scenes, but where were all the people?
Mark Lehner is professor of Egyptian archaeology at the University of Chicago's Oriental Institute. His work has helped shift the focus of study here from monuments to men.
For the first time, we're excavating to shed some light on the lives of the people, as opposed to just how the elite and the king that they served, how they were buried.
Recent discoveries by Lehner and others have turned the popular understanding of pyramid building on its head. For centuries, the pyramid builders were thought to be slaves. Hollywood fed the myth of a captive labor force cringing under the whip. But one day in 1990, a remarkable discovery shattered that myth forever. A new era in the study of the ancient Egyptians began with a tourist riding a horse. A hoof plunged through the vaulted roof of a tomb that was sealed in the time of the Pharaohs. Inside was a glimpse of eternity. The vault was coated with richly colored plaster, which began to disintegrate the moment it was exposed to the desert air. But for a brief time, it shone as beautifully as the tomb of a king. But the man buried here was not a king or even a nobleman. He was a worker. According to Dr. Zahi Hawass, Director General of the Giza Plateau, The design and construction of this tomb suggest that the man inside was no slave.
Because of the size of his tomb, because of the unique shape of the vaulted ceiling, and also because it was cased inside with plaster, then I believe this is the man who was in charge of the whole administration of the workmen. This is the man who wanted to be sure that all these people live in a good living, and they go early in the morning to work, and they come by in the sunset, and they live in the village, and at the same time when they die, there is a tomb for everyone.
In the months following the discovery of the vaulted tomb, Dr. Hawass and his crews unearthed more than 250 additional graves in the same area. They had found an entire cemetery for workers. The foreman's vaulted tomb is surrounded by the graves of his honored staff. Like the tombs of the pharaohs and noblemen, the workers' graves were probably arranged according to their status. Dr. Hawass found that some tombs displayed hieroglyphic job titles, further proof that the ancient builders of Giza were highly regarded craftsmen.
We found here 3 false doors. Above each one, we found painted stela. We found in the titles of those people the hieroglyphic inscriptions saying that Khirib Yerius means director of building tombs, and Sahaj Yerius means inspector of building tombs.
During excavation, archaeologists made another discovery that helped confirm the workers' status. Like the kings, the builders saw to it that pieces of art accompanied them in eternity. Detailed engravings, hieroglyphics, and small statues offered a glimpse of how the ancient workers actually looked. Hawass and his crew began to see a more and more vivid portrait of the builders, but nothing prepared them for what they would find next. At last, in the shadow of the pyramids, modern workers come face to face with their ancient predecessors.
البتاع ده بالحمى المادة اللي هم جابوها البطرمان دي.
Forensic study of the remains tells a tale of suffering and sacrifice, of labor so grueling it was literally backbreaking.
In the study of the bones that we found, most of the men that has been found in the cemetery, they had stress on their back, on the bones of the back, mean that those people were involved in really moving stones or working in the pyramids or working in the tombs. Archaeology now is not like what you see in King Tut and find gold, and gold in King Tut never give us any idea about the people and about how they lived and about anything. But this cemetery is working with the dirt and the sand. Then each piece of sand, each piece of stone, each piece of pottery reconstruct the Egyptian history. It gives us information about those people.
Today, life on the Giza Plateau still moves to the ancient rhythms of the desert. Modern Egyptians work here now, slowly unveiling the lives of their ancestors.
Mohammed Morsi. Andum. صباح الخير. Ali Camel. خليك راجل يعني road.
A few dozen men report for work at this site today, but during the pyramid construction, there were tens of thousands. Mark Lehner knew that a huge workforce would have required a city to support it. But where was the evidence of this long-abandoned metropolis? The first glimpse of it came when excavators began to uncover a bakery.
It's as though everywhere we open up a hole in the desert, we find massive evidence of bread baking. And we're talking about thousands and thousands and thousands of loaves. Where you have so much bread, the beer can't be far away, and where you have bread and beer, you have to have people. So it says that there are a lot of consumers out here.
Lehner and his team found huge vats for mixing batter and hundreds of bread molds.
We apologize to this pot that's been here for 5,000 years, intact. But there's no way we can take it out home.
The more the archaeologists revealed, the more familiar the bakery became. They had seen its blueprint before. For years, Egyptologists have relied on the tomb of Ti in nearby Saqqara for details about daily life in the time of the pharaohs. Exquisite murals depict a broad range of ancient activities. The illustrations show how the Egyptians brewed beer and how they baked bread in a production line capable of feeding thousands. It matched Lehner's bakery exactly.
The beautiful thing about our results here is that the tomb walls inform what we're finding. You can go to this almost like a Sears catalog, like I say, and say, oh yeah, this is what we've got. It's a nice kind of merger of text, picture, and archaeological remains.
One fragment at a time, the archaeologists pieced together the layout of the ancient construction site. The desert jealously hides most of the evidence, but some clues are right out in the open, just waiting to be recognized for what they really mean. For years, Dr. Lehner drove through this passageway every day without giving it much thought. But when digging revealed that most of the structure was buried in sand, Lehner reconsidered its significance. What appeared to be only a 12-foot ledge was actually a gigantic wall that once towered 30 feet above the desert.
Now you don't build a 26-foot high gateway so men can go to work every day. This is a border, and this is the entrance to something really powerful. And what's really powerful are the pyramids, the tombs, and the temples, the tombs of the elite. And we think that the wall defines a border between all of that, the sacred, the stone, and everything here to the south, which is mud, stone rubble, and the secular support for everything north of the wall. And more I'm convinced this was in fact downtown Egypt during the time the pyramids were built.
Lehner thinks they might soon find a grand palace, even a royal residence on the downtown side of the wall. Through the huge gateway lay a harbor, the center of activity for the entire plateau.
At a harbor, they're certainly unloading the stone, they're unloading the people that they're bringing from the provinces for labor, but they're also unloading all the goods and commodities that came from all those new farms and ranches and cities, towns that were established for feeding the pyramid complex. For the first time, they were gathering people together, not in terms of hundreds, but suddenly in terms of thousands or tens of thousands.
To the edge of the desert, these masses came to make burial tombs for their kings, skyscrapers that would dwarf anything yet built by man. The building techniques were ingenious, but mysterious even today. How did workers lift these huge stones 40 stories high? Many scholars believe they used a giant ramp that spiraled up the sides of the unfinished pyramid to move the blocks to the top.
We would have seen hundreds, if not thousands of men, organized probably into teams of 10 or 20, pulling 2.5-ton blocks on large wooden sleds up the long ramp. There would have been a cacophony of sounds. You would have heard the clink-a-chink of stonemasons cutting the stones, tool sharpeners sharpening the copper chisels, and probably the chanting of thousands of men. They had to be doing this in a real rhythm if they put one block in place every 2.5 minutes.
Even as a picture of the ancient construction site emerges, another important mystery remains. Where did all this limestone, more than 15 million tons, come from? For centuries, a popular myth held that the stone came from a faraway quarry. But Dr. Lehner suspected there had to be a much closer source. For insights, he looked to a modern quarry, where limestone cutting goes on pretty much as it did in 2500 BC. Quarrymen dig long channels as a first step in breaking out giant limestone blocks. If channel marks like these could be found near the pyramids, they'd pinpoint a closer source of stone. Back at Giza, just 300 yards from the base of the largest pyramid, Lehner found what he was looking for: the telltale shape of a channel.
You can actually see the quarryman's pick mark in vertical striations coming down. And he was in here probably alone with lots of dust and chips flying all over the place with his pick, hacking his way through this giant rectangle of limestone bedrock.
Finally, Dr. Lehner had some proof. The stone came from right here, a quarry within sight of the Great Pyramids.
And you can see one edge of the quarry over there, the rock edge, just showing above these massive piles of debris. And if you draw a circle with your eye around the horizon and come over to this sheer rock face, that's the entire outline of the Khufu quarry. The amount of stone missing equals the amount of stone in the pyramid of Khufu, and the sides of the quarry line up with the Khufu pyramid.
Generations missed the quarry because it was filled in with strange debris. Lehner believes this rubble is all that's left of the pyramid construction ramps. When their work was finished, the builders tore down the ramps and dumped the remains here in the quarry.
We're looking at what the pyramid ramps were built out of, just piles and piles of this limestone dust. And then they put up a retaining wall of mud and clay. And this stuff as a whole, is extremely solid. But when you want to take it apart, it really comes apart nicely with a pick and into its constituent parts. So this is essentially what the pyramid ramps must have been built out of, because this is what's here. Tons, millions of tons of this stuff.
Even as we solve the mysteries of how the tombs of the three pharaohs were constructed, scientists and laymen alike are still in awe of the scope of this ancient undertaking. Mark Lehner's discoveries here may help put to rest some of the more far-fetched theories.
It's, for me, much more mysterious and intriguing that the culture ruled by Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure built these rather than some cop-out, you know, which is what, you know, the extraterrestrial option is. It's a cop-out. Well, we don't know how they did it. It was built by somebody else. First of all, it's sort of colonialist to say that somebody else, some other civilization that's missing, built them. But also, I think it really doesn't tap the human mystery of how they were built with so much suffering, with so much dedication, by the people that we know lived here, by the people in the tombs that were buried around here, by the people who were making bread down in our bakery.
As the Great Pyramid of Khufu rose out of the desert, nearing completion, a handful of ancient Egypt's finest craftsmen went to work on another gift to the pharaoh. For thousands of years, pilgrims came here to gaze up at the achievements of the pyramid builders, unaware that buried treasure lay under their feet. In 1954, an underground vault was discovered beneath these capstones near the pyramid's southern base. Inside the vault, explorers found the remains of a boat, a very big boat. Farouk El-Baz remembers the stir the find caused.
The news of the day said that we had found a ship that's kind of a funerary boat. When they removed the pharaoh westward, sailing westward with the sun, so that he'd be buried in this place. And a lot of people expected, now they're going to find his body, the mummy, because the Khufu's mummy had never been found.
Tuhami Mahmoud Ali was foreman of the work crew in charge of the excavation.
أول حجر.
وكان شعورك ايه ساعتها؟
كنت فرحان عشان وجدنا مركب مش في العالم.
I was delighted because we had found a ship, and the likes of which didn't exist anywhere in the world.
Tuhami was among the first men to enter the vault in nearly 50 centuries. But instead of the pharaoh's mummy, they found a completely disassembled ship. 1,224 pieces of polished cedar, arranged, in the words of one observer, like parts of a toy model. It took 13 years of painstaking labor to put the boat back together. The old shipbuilding techniques, like hand-tying planks to the rails, were scrupulously followed. Naval historians say the boat is an engineering feat in wood, as impressive in its own way as the pyramids are in stone. But even as the vessel took shape, experts disagreed about how it had originally been used. Some said it was simply a funeral barge. Others believed it was a ship for the pharaoh in his afterlife. Hieroglyphs from the nearby pyramid of Unas suggest that a pharaoh was expected to sail two boats, one during the day and one at night, as he followed the sun throughout eternity. Other reliefs, like these on the walls of the tomb of Ti, provide documentary evidence of the importance of boat traffic on the River Nile, but shed little further light on the debate, except to show us how the ancient boats were made. But whatever its use, the 142-foot vessel must have made quite an impression, then as it does today. is one of the oldest ships in the world. Housed in its own museum, Khufu's boat attracts some 200,000 visitors a year.
These two for the anchor.
Ah, c'est
The anchor.
Ouais.
And the big one to go to push it away
Ah oui, c'est
from the
la...
bank.
Ouais, ouais.
Hmm?
Comment on appelle
But
ça?
this is small cabin for the captain.
Oui.
And this the big cabin for the mummy of Cheops.
Ouais.
This is all cedar wood.
34 years later, scientists prepared to examine the contents of a second underground chamber, discovered a stone's throw away from the first. But this time around, they would not excavate it. Dr. Elbaz, director of Boston University's Center for Remote Sensing, and a team of scientists sponsored by the National Geographic Society, began the operation with ground-penetrating radar, which provided a rough map of shapes below the surface.
Mine is the only real change. Yeah.
This space-age approach has helped solve one of archaeology's thorniest problems: how to explore a site without destroying it. The only digging involved would be scraping away a few feet of loose earth from one of the enormous capstones covering the pit.
Archaeology is no longer a grave robbing activity or a destruction, a way of destroying things until you get the artifacts. It's not, because the site itself might be an artifact to keep it intact the way the ancients had left it. So this is really getting a way of departing from the archaeology the way it was, and we are just opening a whole new way that might apply in many other fields.
The key to the plan: drilling a small hole through the 6-foot-thick capstone into the vault while still keeping it airtight. When the first chamber had been opened in 1954, the air inside was still heavy with the smell of cedar. So there was still a chance the air in this vault too had been trapped there for over 46 centuries, an invaluable scientific find. Bob Moores of Black & Decker developed a sophisticated airlock that would make sure new and old air wouldn't mingle. A system of O-rings and backup seals would be anchored to the rock. The drill would move through the limestone at the rate of about 4 inches an hour, with frequent pauses to remove dust and debris. Moore's unique design would then allow the hole to remain airtight when other instruments were inserted. Inside the vault, air samples would be collected and tested for traces of modern air pollutants. Finding none might explain why the first ship was so well preserved.
The rotary portion is turned.
Peter Tons of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration would supervise the sampling procedures.
The boat in the adjacent pit to this one was extremely well preserved for 4,600 years. And from what I've heard, it has deteriorated more in the past 20 years than in the previous 4,600. So the Egyptians are not very keen on opening this pit and getting the boat out, or if there's a boat in there, of course, and then have it crumble. So they would like to see what's in there, what it's like in there, and then seal the hole back up.
The drilling operations consume one full day, then another. Then, midway through the third day, Bob Moore's drill moves through the last few millimeters of stone.
Break through! Break through! Hey! All right!
Wait, I'll thump on this for a little bit. Because I want to fill this one.
It's time for the rest of the team to go to work. Peter Tons draws about 70 liters of air from the vault.
We're going to take any samples for the...
Yeah.
Since the results of the analysis won't be available for months, Tons decides to perform a less scientific examination on the spot.
It smells stale.
Thanks.
It smells stale, guys. No, definitely does not smell like cedar. Absolutely not.
It's nearly midnight before the photographers get their turn. The long black tube is part of the special video system designed by Pete Patrone of National Geographic.
What does monitor look like, anybody? All the way to right.
In order not to affect the temperature inside the vault, a heatless lamp provides the light.
Can you turn to the left slowly?
It's a moored hole.
Kind of a ragged one, isn't it?
That's the first time we had in a vertical position to work on it.
As the camera begins its slow descent through the hole, everyone gathers around a TV monitor to catch a first glimpse of things that haven't been seen for nearly 5,000 years. An eerie shower of drilling dust signals the camera's entrance into the space which has waited so long in darkness.
Right. Oh.
Oh, it looks like dust.
Chalk is falling. Pieces.
It looks like a mats. Oh, nice! God bless Gertie. Hey, okay, you're right. It is a boat.
Yeah,
That's not dirty laundry.
look at the wagon and fog.
Look at all that stuff on top.
Well, it comes from the ceiling, I think.
Ooh.
Pieces of limestone, I guess.
Right.
Don't you think?
It does look like pieces that flaked off the, maybe the sealer, gypsum sealer.
Oh, yeah, that's it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Pieces.
My, that is gorgeous, gorgeous.
Tehame has no doubt that he is looking at the pieces of a second ship. The camera shows a notched beam that supported a deckhouse roof, a valuable clue to the length of the ship. Other angles reveal a copper fitting, a stonemason's ancient calculations. Experts now believe each piece is part of a ship very much like the first, though perhaps a bit smaller. The obvious damage inside the vault may have resulted from a brick-making machine used to build the museum for the first ship. It stood directly above the second chamber, vibrating and dripping water. Other details seem to confirm this hypothesis. Wet-looking patches in the roof where plaster had fallen. A pair of ghostly oar blades warped by moisture.
No, drop down.
And then, something unexpected.
Whoa.
Come on here.
4,000-year-old air.
Yeah. Go, officer.
That's it.
Lock
We
it.
can zoom in.
Lock the nut.
Is that him?
Look at him. There he is.
ده معلم تمشي يا عم
5,000 years ago.
Right, Iman, right.
This is daughter of Kiyab.
How else could the beetle live? You know, I mean, he has to be breathing air. So if we have a live beetle, that means we don't have 4,000-year-old air. Whatever the results are, bad or good, if they're scientific, that's what we tried to do. We tried to find out. And we did find out there's something living down there.
After taking samples of the air and after looking at it, we know that we have not disturbed the site at all. So this is kind of starting a whole new, opening a whole new door to technology, and I personally believe that this might be a new change to the archaeological exploration, very much like what age dating did to archaeology earlier in this century.
Age dating propelled archaeology from a collector's pastime into a more exact science. Video exploration promises to extend its reach into realms that have always seemed impenetrable, until now. With one ship fully restored, the other remains undisturbed in its resting place, now resealed. The purpose of these sister ships remains a mystery. Were they meant to convey the pharaoh in life along the Nile, or bear his reunited body and soul through the afterlife in a relentless pursuit of the sun? That eternal journey demanded a well-preserved body. And some of the pharaoh's bodies are still with us, bearing silent witness to the skill and dedication of the ancient embalmers. The mummifier's art, once a museum curiosity, has become the scholarly fixation of Egyptologist Bob Breyer.
I tend not to say I'm obsessed with mummies. I know other people do, but I'm interested in all aspects. I have been really, I guess I have been obsessed. I admit it, I'm obsessed.
Dr. Breyer's obsession led him where no other scientist has gone before. After exhausting the texts on mummification, he realized he could never truly understand the procedure unless he performed one himself. And so, a body donor will get a treatment fit for an ancient king.
And then we can take everything beneath the stomach out.
I'm not a mortician. I'm a professor, and I've been teaching Egyptology for more than 20 years. When the University of Maryland Medical School offered to collaborate with me, I had the chance to do the first Egyptian mummification in perhaps 2,000 years. But it's not going to be easy. We're just amateurs compared with the ancient embalmers. They were so skilled, they could remove the brain through the nostrils without damaging the face.
Right there. And let me just get the block and I'm just going to tap it. I want to tap it through.
Okay, go ahead.
All right?
Yep.
It is in, my friend.
I became interested in mummification watching a colleague of mine do a dissection. But I wondered, as I watched this guy dissect the body, how the ancient embalmers did it. My colleague had a large flap in the abdomen to show the students the internal organs. But the ancient Egyptians took out the internal organs through an incision this big. And I wondered, would he be able to do it? Could he reach his hand in and pull out the stomach, the liver, the intestines, the kidney, through an incision this big?
Give it a go. Now, it may just not be sure.
Ron Wade of the University of Maryland School of Medicine agreed to lend his anatomical expertise to the extraordinary proceedings.
This is the only way to find out.
You cut with the front. That's what it is. No. Good. Nice.
To prepare for the mummification, Breyer spent weeks in Egypt, learning all he could about ancient ritual and combing Egypt's ancient marketplaces for the sacred spices and materials his mummy would demand.
Deep within Cairo's Khan al-Khalili Bazaar, there's another market where tourists never go. That's where they have the frankincense, the myrrh, all the things I need for my project. The frankincense I know from an ancient Egyptian text goes on the head of a mummy. They used to anoint the mummy with frankincense. The myrrh, all I know is they used it, but I don't know exactly what they used the myrrh for yet. But I'm going to try to find out before the mummification. ايه ده لبن؟ من فين؟ سوداني؟ Sure? بكم ربع كيلو؟
ربع كيلو 5 جنيه
5 جنيه
5 جنيه
تمام ماشي بالظبط؟
بالظبط
تمام
أنا سادة
بس ما عندي باكور شكرا كثير مع السلامة
دو بخشيش
This frankincense and myrrh probably came from the same place that the ancient Egyptians got theirs from. It comes from Yemen, it comes from the Sudan. It would have been very expensive, and only the embalmers could afford it for wealthy mummies. No one knows how many mummies there are in Egypt, but people were dying for a long time. So there are certainly millions of bodies in the sand and in the earth. Mummification probably began by just discovering that when bodies are buried in the hot Egyptian sand, they're preserved naturally. The soil just dehydrates them naturally. So eventually, if the sand would blow away from a body, you would see a recognizable human being that's been there for maybe 1,000 years. So they realized that the body could be preserved and was preserved. These bodies here in this cemetery in the Fayum are middle class to lower class. They, of course, haven't excavated the entire area yet, but they'll probably find, if they kept going, close to 200,000 bodies. Everyone in ancient Egypt, rich or poor, wanted to be immortal, to be like Osiris, to resurrect in the West. So everybody had a shot at immortality, and the more you could afford, the better your shot at immortality, the better preserve the body, because the body was going to get up and go again in the next world. It was literally going to resurrect, so you had to preserve it. So all your money, all your thought went into preserving your body. The poor man couldn't put too much money into it. He was merely wrapped, placed perhaps even in a mass pit burial, and would just hope for the best.
Okay, hold on. Hold on a second. Okay, Joel, you get out and I got this in. Try to keep it so pieces don't fall off.
Breyer's search brought him to the Cairo Museum, which has more mummies literally than anyone has ever bothered to count. It's filled with the things that pharaohs took with them in death.
The Egyptians didn't just preserve their bodies. They wanted to have backup systems. They didn't want to have just one shot at immortality. So they had large guardian statues to guard their coffins, and small servant statues which would come to life and serve them in the next world. To make the actual trip, they built elaborate coffins painted with an idealized image of the person, and covered them with magical spells to protect the body from harm. Often when people look at these cases and the wrappings, they see the beautiful paintings. They see the gods and the hieroglyphs, but they don't realize there's a human being inside, still looking pretty much like he did 3,000 years ago. The great thing about mummies, and what I think draws people to them, is that they're recognizable. You see somebody who was once a pharaoh, a king of Egypt who died 3,000 to 4,000 years ago. But if you knew him, you would say, ah, there's Seti, there's Ramses. He's still recognizable. He may weigh a lot less, maybe 28 pounds is the average weight of a mummy after it's dehydrated. But you would still recognize him not only as a person, but as who he was. Most people don't know these pharaohs by name, but imagine what it would be like coming face to face with Julius Caesar, Alexander the Great, Helen of Troy. This case contains one of the greatest kings that Egypt ever knew.
Just the primary tests for this.
Nasri Iskander is the keeper of mummies in the Egyptian Museum. He's been doing it for 20 years and is one of the foremost authorities on mummies, certainly on the Egyptian collection.
And they seem not.
So everything looks good?
Nothing is unusual.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Oh, he looks wonderful. The pharaoh Ramses the Great reigned for 67 years. He was more than 80 when he died over 3,000 years ago. This is the kind of mummification I want to do. The Ramses mummy shows us just how good the Egyptian embalmers were. His hair was dyed henna. His fingernails were painted. Everything was done for him so that he would look young forever.
When I see this, I feel something inside. I can't explain it, but I just feel it.
Yes.
And I think that most of the people will feel this.
Yes.
And this is not just a dead body. No, this is a history. Big history. This man built Egypt.
Breyer's search eventually took him across to the west bank of the Nile, the land of the dead, where the Pharaohs' temples still stand.
What's remarkable is that after 3,000 years, we have not only the temples of stone, but also the flesh and bones of the men who built them. The mummies of the pharaohs may have been impervious to time, but they were still vulnerable to one thing: looters. It's really a miracle that we have the ones we do. Many of the pharaohs that survived intact were found in a secret cache at Deir el-Bahri. It's isolated and desolate today, as it's always been, which is probably why the royal mummies weren't discovered until about 100 years ago. It's a good thing they were. They're some of the best examples of the work of the master embalmers. Definitely something for me to strive for. Sometime in the late 1870s, local villagers stumbled upon this hidden cache of royal mummies. The miracle is that they even found this place. The hole was undoubtedly filled in. They probably noticed water running over the cliffs and disappearing into it, and they figured this must be a tomb. Word was sent to the Antiquity Service in Cairo that a tomb had been found, not containing one mummy or two, but 40. When the inscriptions on the coffins and bandages were read, they knew they had found the pharaohs of Egypt. They knew they had found Ramses the Great, Seti I, the great warrior king Thutmose III. They knew what they had. They had found some of the greatest kings of ancient Egypt. In 6 days, they took the coffins out of this hole, and they brought them across to the west bank of the Nile, where they were ferried across to the east to the Antiquity Service's steamer, and then they went north to Cairo. All along the banks of the Nile, the women of the villages lined the banks and wailed like the ancient Egyptian women must have wailed. These were their kings leaving, and they were also wailing for a legacy that was going to Cairo, never to be seen again by them.
But their ancient kings would inspire a new kind of reverence, compelling scholars like Breyer to retrace each detail of their final ritual journey.
When a king died, he was ferried across to the west bank of the Nile, where the embalmers' shops were. The Egyptians lived on the east bank, and those who could afford it buried their dead on the west. The sun dies in the west, so they associated the west with death, and they called the people who died Westerners. They didn't want to call them dead, so they had lots of euphemisms. They called them Westerners. If you died, you went west.
Ancient texts tell us that the embalming process took 70 days.
The first thing they did was to take out the moist internal organs. This is to help prevent decay. If you don't remove all the moisture, the body will rapidly deteriorate. Embalmers were really technicians. They were the ones who knew the anatomy, knew where the liver was, knew where the stomach was, and could take it out through a small slit.
It was different. Okay, Bill, do you have a tray?
Each organ was carefully removed and ritually placed in a special vessel called a canopic jar.
Well, the ancient texts say that they washed out the abdominal cavity with myrrh and palm wine. So we're just going to do it the way they said they did it. So we've got a linen covering inside the abdominal cavity already. And I'm going to put the myrrh right on the linen. This is the palm wine. Here it goes. The ancient Egyptian word for wine was erp, like a burp.
The next phase of mummification, dehydrating the body, will require salts obtained in Egypt.
In the ancient days, they called it the field of salts here, the Wadi Natrun. Natron is much better than just salt for preserving something. It's got an extra thing in it. It's got basically baking soda. And you know how you put, when you put baking soda in your refrigerator to absorb the smells? This must have helped in mummification. It not only preserved, but it got rid of some of the horrible odor that must have been involved with mummification.
He would need a lot of natron, more than 300 pounds in all to be on the safe side.
The mummy has to be totally immersed in it. So I'm going to have natron under it. I want to put natron on top of it, then fill the inside of the mummy with little packets of it, so that the mummy will dehydrate from inside and outside at the same time. Even Tutankhamun had some of these little packets that were buried in his embalmer's cache. All right, Ron, we'll do it down here.
Okay,
I'm going to pour it right here. Okay? There it goes. Yeah, you just smooth it out. In a small basement room at the University of Maryland Medical School, we've recreated the ancient embalmer's tent, keeping the humidity low to be like the dry desert air.
Okay.
We're just about there.
Do you think we can get about 6 or 7 more jars out of that?
No problem.
All right, Ron, here's the liver. If you can put it on the far corner, and we'll cover it a little later with a little more natron. Now we have to wait 35 days to see if the mummification actually takes place. We don't know for sure if the dehydration will be complete. We don't know if the natron will do its job. Whatever the outcome, this has been an important scientific venture. But there's something else about doing this. Almost defying death, preserving some measure of that human being as he was in life. I wonder, did the ancient embalmers feel any of this? Did they feel pride, hope, fear? I think it'll work, but I really don't know for sure. Wow. Feet look good, don't they? That's really desiccated. That is good. It's good. Now, take your brush. Let's see where we go. Here's the fingers. You know, it looks more like a mummy than I thought it would, because I thought there'd be more moisture. I think we're doing it the way they did it. I never be 100% sure, but I think this is the way they did it. Break this. Of course, I'm grateful to the body donor. It's still a wonderful thing for anyone to give his body to science, and I'm hoping that he would enjoy knowing that this is happening. I don't know for sure, though, but I like to think that he would like it. Finally, we want to finish the process, just as they would have, by anointing the body with oils, then wrapping it in fine linen. If you were wealthy enough, you'd have a priest who's wearing a mask of the jackal-headed Anubis, god of embalming. The priest would say certain rituals over the body as it was being wrapped. They would pour unguents on the body. Frankincense and myrrh would be used to perfume it. This is good. Shrink. Okay. Now, one of the funerary amulets used for the deceased was a heart amulet to protect the heart. The only organ inside him now is the heart, and this will protect the heart and make sure the heart doesn't speak out against him in the next world. Okay. Let's get one of the magical bandages, and then when it comes out, I think you'll see there's an inscription on it. This has this right here is the weighing of the heart against the feather of truth in the next world. So it's an appropriate bandage for this area. The magical spells on the bandages
aren't really part of my research. I'm interested in the technique of mummification. People just felt we should do it right, do the magical spells too, so we've done that. And they're accurate. These are what the papyri say should be on it. But the hope is it'll be in a medical museum. Periodically, we're going to have to sample tissues to see what age does to it, how the dehydration continues. So it'll be monitored carefully, and hopefully people will learn from it. It looks good. We just have to seal the ends. Seal the ends. I think the care that we're giving to this mummy in the whole mummification process is certainly better than what the average mummy got. There have been no shortcuts for this man, which is good. He deserves it. At the tomb, the last rituals were performed on the mummy. There was the opening of the mouth ceremony, where a priest would take an adze, an oddly shaped implement, touch it to the mummy's mouth, and say a final blessing to give the mummy new life.
This modern mummy's contribution to science has just begun. He'll continue to inform us about the process of mummification in the coming years and decades. We can only imagine what his ancient counterparts would have made of our endless fascination with them. Would they curse us for our meddling ways, as some have claimed? Perhaps. But if it was immortality that the Egyptians were after, then surely they, like no other people in history, have found immortality in the realm of our insatiable curiosity.